The story begins on the continent of Jiuzhou, populated by foul things, demons, barbarians, and humans. People are ruled by the immortal Qing Dynasty, though mortals and perfects live together. However, practicing immortality requires a unique gift. The snow in the Yumin Mountains is very white, and has stayed that way for many years. But the celestial stage only allows one to generate spring with a single thought. Yet a large number of ascetics do not want to strive for anything. For the sake of this limit of strength, the old man had to give up a lot of things, including humanity. One only has to set foot on the ground, and a beautiful landscape appears. Now no one will remember what he was really doing here. Suddenly someone called out to the old man and his thoughts drifted away. It turns out that someone broke into the sect and started killing the students mercilessly. And this person also wants to destroy their sect. The sect head was surprised as he thought that the 6 Earth Stage elders would obviously be able to stop this freak. The subordinate interrupted him, saying that the elders were already dead, and the disciples would fight to the death to avenge them. Afterward, the old man decided to think over what he had heard. After a moment, he made the right decision for him, and summoned a dragon for himself. Next, he jumped on the dragon's head. After that, he went to his sect. When he approached, he was in great shock. He saw piles of corpses and blood everywhere. As he got closer, he saw the silhouette of a man who was sitting with a sword on his throne. The man was just cleaning a sword that was completely covered in blood. Looking a little closer, the old man realized he was mortal. Back then, he was furious that the century-old human sect had been destroyed by some mortal. The man said that the elders of the human sect raped women, taking their energy, and the disciples ruthlessly killed 289 people in the village with the help of dark sorcery. The old man didn't understand him, for he had decided to destroy an entire sect because of a few bugs. For one sect could save a lot of people in the battle with demons, and he suddenly began to decide everything for others. This assassin explained that princes, like commoners, commit crimes, and they, the perfect ones, are no exception. But in his opinion, only the old man is guilty of destroying the Yunming sect. In order to reach the heavenly stage, he will consume tens of thousands of innocent souls, and all the members of the sect are accomplices, for which they were punished fairly. The old man didn't understand why he was such a fool. After all, a tiny sacrifice in exchange for power that only drew prosperity was completely justified. He could only reason from a mortal's point of view, just as summer insects cannot talk about winter. So the old man decided to straighten him out and forget about the incident at last. The killer was not confused and decided to take the fight. Then he jumped on the old man to show who was stronger. The one in turn was surprised, for he thought he would just run away. With a single swing of his sword, he slashed the dragon's head. The old man didn't understand how it was even possible, because no one had ever managed to do it so quickly before him. Then he took a closer look and realized that this was no ordinary sword, but a spiritual treasure. He didn't understand how a mortal body could use it. But then, the old man pulled himself together. He reassured himself that, even if he could hold this spiritual treasure, he would definitely not be able to defeat the human sect's sword. Next, he activated the fire sky technique, after which he just jumped on him with his sword. The assassin was no slouch and stopped his attack. At the same time, it was evident on his face that he was completely calm. The old man didn't understand how it was possible that one was able to stop his sword. The fiery heaven is the ultimate spiritual treasure. It cannot be destroyed so easily. And then the kid decided not to hesitate and counterattacked him, thereby destroying his sword. The old man wasn't discouraged even in this situation, as he remembered that even if his weapon was so powerful, their human sect had a secret weapon placed within them, namely the large formation protecting the mountain, after which he activated it. The old man was very pleased that he could finally destroy it. Except the kid wasn't scared at all. He was very calm on the contrary. Next, he decided to end this circus and swung his sword, after which the formation was destroyed, and the old man was defeated. He fell to the ground and couldn't believe how it was possible. As soon as the kid started to approach the old man, he started to crawl away in terror. Then the boy began to tell me that this sword, which destroys swords and dispels sorcery, can only be used by mortals, and the perfected and demons can't touch it. So he asked if he really didn't recognize this sword in himself. The old man looked at his sword, which was right in front of his eyes, and asked who he even was, for he had no idea and could not recall him at all. He only assumed that he was a hired swordsman. Then the kid shouted that the Yuming sect has harmed tens of thousands of people, and the hired swordsman Su Hangxi is here on the orders of the Qing Dynasty emperor. That's when the old man realized he'd come to kill him. Therefore, he asked that he should deliver posthumous words to the majesty. The kid didn't even listen to him and just chopped his head off. Su Hangxi was glad that the old man had finally been executed. after which he set out on a long journey. Along the way, he decided to reminisce about his childhood, specifically about how he spent all his days with his little sister, and he always gave her a nice meal. She promised that when she grew up, she would become his wife. But Su Hanshi didn't even believe it, since her mom said she would get fat, and because of her difficult character, her husband would endure beatings. Sis, of course, could not tolerate such words and kept hitting him on the head. Sis really liked to bat and always asked him to get up and fight with her. Tom had no choice but to just slowly walk away from the situation. Suddenly one day, all the inhabitants of the small village heard a huge rumble. Next, everyone saw the ground begin to crack as if from an earthquake. And these cracks were so large that residents fell at them and crashed to their deaths. And there were also a bunch of rocks that fell on the ground and on people's heads. Suddenly, Suhanisi and her little sister saw a crying baby in the rain of stones. Suhansi decided not to hesitate and ran to save her. But unfortunately, Suhansa suddenly saw a huge rock that flew straight at him. Suhansi was completely shocked and stood in a stupor. Sis decided not to hesitate and save him, while sacrificing herself. And next, Suhanisi only saw the stones slamming into the ground with great speed and crushing her sister. With this, Suhansa's face even had the blood of her little sister, who had been crushed by the huge stone. He could not believe what he saw, so he immediately ran to the rock to his little sister to help her get out. For he believed she was dead. But before he could even approach, the ground beneath his feet began to fail. And after that, he went down himself. Eventually, he got lucky and fell into some water. He began to choke and drown. Still, he pulled himself together and began to come up for air. After a few seconds, he succeeded and found himself somewhere on the shore. Looking ahead, he was shocked. As he saw many corpses of his village, Suhangshi immediately went to look for his parents. Just as suddenly he heard someone behind him. Turning around, he saw an old man who was surprised that it had hit the village after all. An elder approached the old man and calmed him down, telling him that here were mere mortals and that was all. He added, however, that there are no laws in this world that can limit them perfecting themselves. Just as suddenly the two heard some sort of cry for help. There was a mother who had covered her child from a rock and was asking for help. The elder realized that if the others found out about this incident, they would be in trouble. So he solved this issue by simply killing this mother by shooting her right in the head. The elder didn't even blink an eye at all, and was even the opposite of joyful, which made him even more excited. Suddenly he saw a small pebble flying straight at his head. The elder thought it was some kind of joke and just dodged it. It was Su Hansi who started yelling at them that they had killed all the people of the village. He was also very angry that they killed his parents. To the elder, it was just a bug that he just wanted to squash. Su Hansi realized that they were immortals. And to them, just like demons, human lives meant nothing. Therefore, they are not worthy of being immortal. Even as a child, he understands this simple truth. So not only is he challenging them, but he's going to bring justice to the whole village. Just as suddenly, the sword on the old man's back began to vibrate. While the elder was threatening him, the old man decided to stop him. It was then that the old man realized that Duanwu had decided to choose a master. He was very interested in the choice of sword. The old man also realized that the little brat wanted revenge, yet he was still too weak. Then he drew his sword and threw it in front of the kid. After which, the old man explained that this sword was his only chance to kill him. The elder immediately began to arise and say that these weapons should not be handed over to such mortals. The old man reassured him, saying that everything was fine and that Duanwu had chosen the master. At the same time, the old man sensed a change in fortunes. And lastly, he said he hoped he'd kill him when he grew up. Next thing you know, they just disappeared. And thus Su Hansi was left with his new sword from now on. And also even then he had already sworn to kill this old man, which he had recently done. Suddenly his sword from the box began to break free. Su Hongxi immediately started to stop him, and promised to find him a new master when he dealt with the Yunming sect. Su Hongxi only realized that he was already impatient. The sword decided to teach him a lesson with anger, and scared him, stabbing right between his legs, almost hitting a very important organ. Su Hongxi immediately started shouting at the sword, and asked him not to do that anymore. After all, it had scared him a lot. Just as suddenly, he saw the sword begin to vibrate. Su Hongxi realized that he had sensed his new master. Not far from Su Hansa's resting place, strange things were happening. Namely, some sect was following a little girl. She was a student of Jixia Academy, so she threatened them with the punishments that would follow killing her. The head of this sect only laughed. Only money in exchange for life suits them. If there is money, no one will touch her. Then he started reaching out to this little girl to kill her. Suddenly, Su Hanyu appeared and entered their conversation. He was surprised that even a perfecting dark stage had to rob little girls. He only responded by advising him, a mortal, to go on his way. Su Hongxi certainly didn't want to get involved in this. but he had a duty after all. That's when the head of the sect got curious about who he was for being so brazen. Su Hangxi decided to piss him off a bit and took out a huge belt with a bunch of tokens and started going through them as he wanted to find the right one. He had already realized that the robbers were ordinary garrison troops, but they were made up of mortals. He had even assumed that they were palace guards. But he realized that was foolish, as they were only capable of intimidating officials. Then he went through them like that for a few more minutes. He still couldn't find the right token. He even found one for drunken riders, for those who kill livestock, for petty thieves, and for tax evaders. After a few more minutes, this infuriated the head of this sect, and he decided to finish this idiot off. Su Hangxi immediately reacted and chopped his arm. Then the sect leader realized that he was a hired swordsman. Su Hangxi only smiled and revealed that this was one of his professions. The sect had announced that according to the law of the Qing Dynasty, he was forbidden to execute immortals privately without trial. Saint Hansa did not understand them, for by law they should then be aware that it was forbidden for immortals to attack hired swordsmen. Therefore, violators must be sentenced to execution. And then Su Hansui just killed him, after which he decided to move on to the rest of the sect, for they were accomplices. Those were immediately frightened and started running away, but none of them made it in time, and in the end, Su Hanya ended up killing everyone there. The little girl was standing nearby and was just in shock. She was shocked to see a mercenary swordsman who could kill demons and immortals. Su Hangxi paid attention to this girl and realized that it had come out awkwardly, since she'd seen him kill them all there. Even though he had saved her, he definitely wouldn't let her spread rumors, so he decided to give her 500 liang silver for her silence. The girl stopped him, and since he is her savior, therefore she will never and never tell anyone about what happened. That's why she can't accept the money. Su Hangxi decided that it was even for the best. So now she should pay him 500 liang, so that he would definitely make sure that she wouldn't say anything. This girl was a little shocked by what was said. Then Su Hansu decided to act and wanted to tie her up for good measure. And then she screamed at the whole forest to let her go. After a while, Su Hansa still had her in his hands. She had already said several times that she would send her a messenger with money when she returned to Jiuzhou Academy. But Su Hansa didn't even think about it, for she would be robbed on the way. So he decided to bring her to the academy himself to get his money for sure. The girl was against it because, for safety, Su Hansa tied her up and put her on a horse, which of course did not like the girl. Next, they set off on the road toward the academy. On the way to Su Hansa Academy, he decided to call the Qing Dynasty Palace. He called his old friend. This time, she decided to take a bath in front of him, and Su Hangxi asked her to stop taking a bath during their conversation right before the call. She didn't understand why he was shy if they had taken baths together as children. Su Hangxi only laughed, for he had already thought that Her Highness did not see him as a man. The girl asked him to stop, for he just liked to see his sophisticated look. Still, she decided to stop seducing him and get down to business. Su Hangxi revealed that according to the plan, he would deliver Jiang Bei to Jiuzhou Academy within 10 days. After this information, she got dressed and got out of the bathtub, after which he ordered his army to take their positions, and also have the spies act according to plan. She couldn't wait for things to change in this world. Meanwhile, the customer who wanted to kill Jiang Bei was yelling at the second elder. He didn't understand how the second elder couldn't deal with a small girl. The second elder immediately began to explain himself and say that he didn't know that Jiang Bei had such a strong defense. The dark stage enhancers sent to deal with her were killed. The customer was very angry because if the dark stage powers weren't enough, then the yellow stage perfected ones should be sent. The second elder explained that all the yellow stage perfectors are also elders, and he has no right to command them. The customer decided to also explain to him that if you couldn't use them, you had to use your own uncleanness. The customer learned the secret about the second elder's uncleanness from his sources. He was completely shocked and couldn't even say anything in response. Next, the customer gave him assignments. He must first prove his worth before his master will allow him to do dirty deeds. And if he fails to do so, he will be sentenced to death for conspiring with evil. He only agreed to his instructions in return. In the meantime, Su Hangxi stayed at the hotel with the girl. The servants immediately began unloading his belongings into the room. The servant who was unpacking noticed that his luggage was very heavy, and assumed that there were some jewels in there. Su Hangxi only laughed and said that he was a famous seducer, and he had hidden the recently caught girl in his belongings. The servant thought he was joking and just left, except that the servant's smile didn't please Su Hansa, so he decided to follow him. And not for nothing at all, as he walked up to some 2 armed men. Then he turned to the girl and told her to get out. Zhang Bei jumped out of the bag and started yelling at him since she wasn't going to sleep in the same room with him. Su Hongxi calmed her down, telling her that he wasn't going to stay long. In response, Zhang Bei wondered where he was going. Su Hongxi told her not to be nervous since she wouldn't be completely alone. He'll still have his sword. He also told me in confidence that there's a real pervert in that box, and he especially likes young girls like her. And lastly, of course, he ordered her to make sure he didn't get out of there. And yet Zhang Bei asked him again where he was going. Su Hongxi said that he didn't get to go to cities very often, so he decided to go out to drink wine. Zhang Bei was shocked at his insolence, and she was very afraid of that pervert in the box. Meanwhile, Su Hongxi calmly walked into the city, while 3 elders could be seen behind him on the rooftop. One of them saw that the sword behind this mortal's back was not simple at all, and it's even possible that those dark stage refiners were killed by him, which is basically true. So they decided as soon as night fell, they would have to deal with that girl. That being said, one of them decided to personally deal with that guy. After a while, 2 people quietly broke into Zhao Bei's room. They're already reaching out to take her down. All of a sudden, the box started to vibrate really badly, and after that, a sword burst out of the box. From all the noise, Zhao Bei herself woke up. As soon as she came to her senses, she saw that the box was empty. And then I saw 2 people in front of me, and she immediately remembered Su Hansa's words about making sure that no one escaped from there. Then she realized that those 2 were the perverts from the wooden box. Those only laughed and introduced themselves as unholy. And after that, they started turning into werewolves. Next, they jumped onto Zhao Bei to quickly dispose of her. Meanwhile, Su Hongxi walked to the city with a calm mind. But of course he knew everything and saw those guys. And after a while he got tired. After which he turned around and turned to the girl, saying that he was already going around deserted places all the time to let her attack him. But he's been doing it for so long now that he's getting tired of it. The girl immediately noticed that Su Hansui was an interesting person for such a venture. But even more, she wondered why he wasn't scared, since he knew she'd come to take him down. Su Hongxi only laughed as he has long known that he is not their main target. Besides, he'd really hate to fight such a beautiful woman. The girl was thrilled that he was willing to sacrifice his life for that girl in the hotel. Su Hansa decided to upset her a bit, and decided to suggest to her that the girl they were trying to kill could also be a swordswoman. Although she doesn't look like anything, she's not very smart, and her skills aren't top-notch. The girl was dumbfounded by the information as she suddenly felt a strange feeling. Then, she realized that he really wasn't lying, and the little girl was really a swordsman. Meanwhile, Zhang Bei had come to Zhang Bei's rescue with the sword that had chosen her. The werewolves were at a loss as to what was even going on. This magical treasure began to wipe them out. Zhang Bei still didn't understand what was even going on here. Meanwhile, Su Hongxi sensed her 2 accomplices had not completed their part of the plan. The girl also sensed it and was in a stupor. Only then the girl realized that he had deliberately led her away so that she could not do anything to help her partners. Su Hongxi only laughed at the fact that it only came to her now, for he so definitely wouldn't have dealt with her, the yellow stage fiend, if that stupid girl was messing around. She was furious and swore that she would never trust humans again. And began to say that the second elder had tricked her into attacking the swordsman. She decided to ask Su Hansa if that swordsman was really that swordsman. Su Hansa decided not to hide anything, and confirmed her words. Then the girl began to say that she had attacked out of her own free will, and did not want to fight him at all. She added that she was simply betrayed, so she offered to do something for him, and then in return, he would let her go. Su Hongxi thought this could be quite interesting, so he decided to let her go if she would tell who sent her after the dumbass. She realized that there was no way she could give up her customer, so she went to plan B. She had no choice but to kill him, and she turned into a monster in a split second. She added that swordsmen that can't improve without their weapons are no more dangerous than a bug. So hugging him, she snatched his weapon and jumped back to a safe distance. The girl began to say that she had killed a lot of people in her life, but she had never dealt with swordsmen before. So it was very interesting for her. Su Hongxi didn't understand why she needed to transform into a scary freak if she already looked great before the transformation. The girl didn't understand how he even dared to tease her in the very face of imminent doom. Su Hansa, of course, laughed at her, for it certainly wasn't true that all swordsmen couldn't improve. For then he is, she says, special. Su Hongxi summoned his surname and immediately grabbed her with his huge hand. The woman in response immediately started asking to let her go, and then she would tell him everything. But it was already too late, and Su Hongxi was unwilling to go along with the previous terms of the deal. Whereupon the familiar crushed her with a huge hand right into 2 pieces. Su Hongxi didn't understand why every time he summoned a familiar, he didn't listen to it. In general, a familiar was a magical spirit that served witches, sorcerers, and other practitioners of magic. After that, he turned to the familiar and started yelling at him, since he had told him not to squeeze his opponent to death immediately after appearing. After all, this was not the first time this had happened, but even the opposite always. Just as suddenly, he felt something strange and turned around. But there was nothing there, just the usual wind. For some reason, he thought he sensed someone was watching him. It really was, and he was really being watched through a hologram. The man watching him was very surprised that the swordsman was able to summon a familiar. This world was becoming more and more interesting to him. Then this gentleman turned to Mo and ordered him to get ready, as he would need to meet with a wonderful person, that swordsman Suhansa. Then a Mo began to emerge from the ground. Mo then asked the Lord why he was so interested in this swordsman. He replied that the absolute majority of those who were being perfected could only use the spells of the 5 elements. Units at or above the celestial level are able to summon spirit animals. And talents like Suhansa being able to summon a familiar is extremely, extremely rare. And yet he's a swordsman. Nevertheless, Mo believed that he himself could get rid of it. And the gentleman had absolutely no reason to get his hands dirty with other people's blood. But really, he wasn't even going to kill him. When he gets stronger, he'll probably be dangerous, even to himself. So he would like to be on friendly terms with him and even help him develop. He was thinking ahead. After all, fighting an opponent they've raised themselves is the most interesting. Meanwhile, Qiaozhengbei and Suhansa were shouted at by the master of the hotel where they were staying, because their room was full of holes and battle marks. The hotel master was sure that it wasn't an imp, so he asked where it was since it had destroyed the room. Qiaozhengbei kept repeating and repeating that it was really an evil thing, but he didn't care. He just wanted the money. It was then that Su Hangxi himself decided to intervene in the dialogue. He went up to the hotel master and gave him a Qing Dynasty ticket. He hoped that these silver coins would be enough to reimburse them for their losses and move them to another room. He went about his business with a happy face, and next, Su Hangxi turned around to Qiaozhengbei and said that she owed him another 100 silver. That means she already owed him 600 coins. Qiaozhengbei was shocked, for he had given him a ticket for only 10 silver pieces, and her debt had suddenly increased by 100 coins. Then Su Hangxi pointed his finger at the sword, and added that she could consider the remaining 90 as payment for the fact that the sword had saved her. After moving to their new room, they decided to get some rest. Out of boredom, Qiaozhengbei decided to ask if he really also had the Duan sword behind his back. He only replied that it was true, and didn't elaborate further. Then she wondered why these swords allowed an ordinary mortal to kill demons and perfects. Su Hanzi explained that each Duan Wu had the soul of a strong refiner sealed within it. Or rather, they had voluntarily inhabited these weapons. Qiaozhengbei didn't understand what it was all for. Su Hangxi didn't understand her questions, since he knew that she was a student of Jixia Academy. And a student of this academy should know about the origin of Duanhu. Qiaozhengbei explained that she hadn't gone through this yet. Su Hangxi exhaled loudly and began to recount that hundreds of years ago, mortal perfects and demons were constantly at war. The first immortal emperor of the Qing Dynasty gathered many perfect ones and fought for decades until the war ended, so that the balance of power under the immortal Qing Dynasty would not be disturbed from now on. Then they found a solution. The 32 strongest perfecting ones voluntarily forged swords from their bodies, turning into 32 Duanwu, allowing ordinary mortals to kill demons and the perfected. And the imperial authority gathered such people into a single organization, creating a society of swordsmen specializing in punishing and perfecting demons who had committed a crime. Then Qiaozhengbei asked what would happen if the perfected or demons took Duanwu for themselves. Or then he should cause trouble if he falls into the wrong hands. Su Hangxi said that this was impossible because Duanwu himself would choose a mortal who could not improve. Or the one whom the sword recognizes as its master will be able to use all its power. Then Qiaozhengbei looked at the sword box and asked where the master of this Duanwu was. Su Hangxi replied with a sad voice that the owner of this sword had died. He was torn apart by a mob of ignorant monsters. She was shocked and didn't even know what to say. Then she assumed that the master hadn't come across a very strong, unclean thing. Su Hangxi only laughed, because there were worse things in this world than some evil beasts. Qiaozhengbei was shocked, because she had never heard that there was something scarier than evil. So she asked what it could be. Su Hangxi, however, replied that it was nothing but greedy and perverted human nature. While he was saying that, I heard snoring. Afterward, I saw her already asleep. Meanwhile, she was having a very scary and slightly strange dream. Her dream was also in reality, meaning it is just a memory. This day was about how her father was killed. It started with Finance Minister Jiang Shun being accused of corruption, caused the dam to breach with a massive flood of water, tens of thousands of deaths of innocent civilians, for which he will be executed in public. That was Chia Zhengbei's father. Her father saw her in the crowd and immediately ordered her to immediately flee from there, for she must not get involved. And the best thing to do was to return to Jiuzhou Academy. The judge began to shout that it was the perfected one trying to obstruct the treasury, so he ordered the sentence to be carried out immediately. Zhengbei immediately ran to her father, but she didn't have time and the sword approached her father's neck faster than her. Right before her eyes, she saw her father's head cut off with a sword. She immediately ran up to the head and started screaming in pain and sadness. She knew and believed that her father couldn't have done it, and the others had just taken it and defamed his name. Her anger created a huge ball of lightning around her. Next, she looked at the judge. That look made him uncomfortable, so he realized that he was probably going to be dealt with now. Chia Zhengbei started walking towards him, causing him to fall down and start begging for mercy. Holding her father's head in her hands, she decided to kill him. This pathetic scum, and thus avenge her father, when suddenly someone ordered her to stop. It was General Liu. Judd immediately started crawling towards him and asking for his help. Ta looked towards Uncle Liu with tears in her eyes. Uncle Liu further announced that he was sorry, but the proof of her father's guilt was serious. The emperor took into account the previous merits of the Jiang family and did not execute all of its members. And if she continued this circus, she risked condemning her entire family to death. She was about to object but didn't have time. Uncle Liu interrupted her, saying that he thought her father might have been framed, but there was nothing to be done. Then he asked her to go back to Jiuzhou Academy, for she would not be harmed there. And as long as she is alive, there is still hope for the Jiang family. And one day her father's honorable name will be restored once again. After which she screamed loudly and then ran away. The group immediately went after her to catch her and kill her, but they were unable to do so because she is a very good runner. But before they met her, and the attack of the main group had already poisoned her and destroyed her immortality veins, so she couldn't run far. And indeed, she fell into the quarry and hid behind a rock. She coughed up blood from the poisoning, but didn't give up. She could not die like this, for she was the last hope of her family. Su Hongxi had been looking at her the whole time, sweetly saying how sweetly she was sleeping. Suddenly, his ring began to vibrate. It was that old girlfriend of Su Hansa's, and she took a bath naked again. She began to tell me that she had accompanied her father to some nasty men, and it was very unpleasant for her. Su Hongxi only laughed and decided to joke that he wasn't a nasty man, or else she would have to wash herself once more. After which, she decided to get down to business. Namely, they should already reach the border of Jiuzhou Academy tomorrow. According to Anzi's report, nothing unusual had been seen there, so they should be safe. Su Hansa then turned to Her Highness and asked if she really thought that the hardened old men from the academy would be able to help Qiangbei. Of course, Chia Zhengbei, with his damaged immortality veins, there was no way he would convince those stubborn academy members. But with his Duan Wu, the probability of them extending a helping hand would increase to 70%. And next they said goodbye, exchanging parting words. He wondered, since he had always been told that old men were ruthless. So he decided to stay one more night at the hotel and get a good night's sleep and leave early in the morning. The next morning, he got up early and started to wake up Chia Zhengbei, telling her to clean up and get ready as they were leaving soon. Turning around, Su Hongxi didn't realize what she was doing there. Xi Zhengbei explained that she had wrapped herself in her blanket since they were leaving soon. Su Hongxi realized that there was nothing to hide from her, so he revealed that he had originally wrapped her in a blanket to throw off the trail for those looking for her. But it seems her location had already been revealed. After which, she screamed loudly that even Su Hongxi was frightened by her screams. Qiao Zhengbei realized that the evil that came yesterday had been sent to kill her, so the humans had colluded with the evil ones. Well then, that created another question because it's a capital offense. Su Hansu was shocked with her that she had only just realized it now. He didn't know if it was stupid or even cute, but first he decided to eat a little. As soon as he entered a restaurant, he saw everyone having fun. At that time, Su Hongxi walked up to one of the guys and asked why such a crowd had suddenly gathered here. He pointed his finger at the guy and explained that he was rich and that he was recruiting. It was the same gentleman who wanted to make friends with Su Hansa. He started shouting that even though the food here was not of the best quality, he still wanted everyone to try it. And after the meal was over, he would invite everyone to go to the courtyard where they would pack their things and head out. And once they get to Jiuzhou, he will feed them properly. Jiaobei turned to Su Hansa and offered to also go with him since they were already going to the academy, because it would be much safer this way. Su Hansu only laughed at her suggestion, for they would only die faster. She didn't understand why they would die. Afterward, he asked her to look out into the yard. There was a huge wagon with a horse and a load, and there was exactly 100,000 silver worth of stuff. Such riches will very soon attract brigands, which is very dangerous. And further, he said that they should leave before them, so as not to inadvertently get caught in the middle of it. Just as suddenly, Su Hansa was approached and stopped by the Lord himself. Su Hangxi turned around to him and asked what he needed. Further, the gentleman turned and said he looked very handsome, and suggested that he was a skillful warrior. He further suggested that he go to Jixia Academy together. Su Hangxi quickly grabbed Xiaozhang Beiyu's hand and rejected the suggestions of the Gosoptan. The gentleman himself was shocked by such a statement. However, he decided to be more serious and offered to go with them for 1,000 silver pieces. Such an offer, Su Hangxi could not refuse. After a while, the actors along with Xiaozhang Bei were already sitting on the horses. On the way, he reminded him that he had said that they would die if I went with them. Su Hangxi only laughed as he could not live for long without money, and he paid him the entire amount in advance. Then Xiaozhang Bei asked about what if any danger was encountered along the way. Su Hangxi explained that they already had no choice since he already had the money anyway. So as a last resort, they could just run away. Xiaozhang Bei immediately realized that if she was in danger, this one would also just run away. Su Hansu started to calm her down. He said that a professional like him has standards. He would never let her out of his sight until she repaid her debt. Now she realized that she was still lucky that she owed him money. Suddenly they saw an arrow in the middle of the road and realized that they were being attacked by bandits. Everyone immediately drew their swords and began to prepare for battle. They also informed the gentleman that they were attacked and he should run away immediately. He, of course, did not want to run away, as he had with him all his precious things worth a considerable amount of money. Suddenly the head of the bandits himself entered the conversation and said not to worry, as they had only come for valuables and were not going to harm anyone. Unless, of course, they are very obedient. The Lord shouted for everyone to calm down, and reminded everyone that they were outnumbered, not to mention his bodyguard, so brigands shouldn't be a problem for them. This immediately lifted the spirits of the boys, but the brigands started laughing that they were outnumbered. Next, he sent some guys out to teach them a lesson. They approached the crowd with swords, and they immediately started begging for mercy. After which the brigands again asked who was now more numerous. The gentleman replied in a whisper that they were, of course. Next, they approached Su Hansa and Xiaozhang Bei and ordered them to get off their horse. Su Hangxi decided to keep his head down and obey them for now. Xiaozhang Bei bent down and asked him if it was a good time to run away. Su Hangxi didn't understand why if there was nothing to be afraid of, and one should just relax and watch the performance. Xiaozhang Bei was not sure if it was safe here, for there were so many brigands. Su Hansa only laughed, for there are only 3 dark stage refiners here, and the rest are just ordinary rabble. Xiaozhang Bei immediately started asking about the dark stage because it was the first time she had heard of it, and started asking how strong they were, and what kind of stages they were. Su Hansa was shocked at her teachers for not teaching the students anything. He began to tell me that human refinement was divided into the study of heavenly law, with the quest for immortality, to the refinement of martial skills. The perfected who are on the same stage have the same inner strength. There are 5 stages in total: basic, dark, yellow, earthly, heavenly. Perfecting the basic stages can fight with 10 people. On the dark stages, it is already possible to defeat 100 opponents. On the yellow stages, one can fight on equal footing with 1,000. While on the earth degree, a perfected one has the strength of 10,000 men. A single celestial grade perfected one is capable of defeating a 100,000-man army. Xiaozhang Bei remembered that he had recently easily dealt with the dark stage refining, so he was now on the yellow stage. Su Hangxi did not say anything, and only smiled, after which he walked towards the carriage with the Lord. Xiaozhang Bei immediately asked him where he was going, but he said that he would just come over and pour a little more oil on the fire. Meanwhile, the gentleman was talking to the brigands and was willing to give anything just so they wouldn't kill anyone. The head of the bandits began to tell that the way to him was not easy, and they could not limit themselves to his belongings. Then, one of the guys suggested that the Lord agreed to stay in their den for a couple of days. The master immediately began to tremble with fear, for he realized that they wanted to dishonor him. Even though he was handsome, he did not want to be treated like that. Suddenly, Su Hansa approached the gentleman. He told him if he continued to make comedy, he would soon get bored. The gentleman gave him a strange look and asked him what he was even doing there. Su Hangxi realized that he thought he was a bandit. Therefore, he immediately said that he was not. The master immediately apologized for this mistake and shook his hand. Su Hongxi told him to pay up and he would forget about it. Suddenly the robbers began to shout for them not to move. Su Hongxi turned around to the brigands and realized that it looked like all the brigands had already given themselves away. So he asked the Lord to order his servant to deal with them. The Lord only apologized and decided to get out of this drama. This did not please the brigand, and he brought his sword up to his face. The Lord immediately started saying that he was an ordinary merchant and he wouldn't even be able to tie up a chicken, let alone deal with them. But then, with a serious face, he added that if he threatened with his sword, his flashy bodyguard could settle the matter himself. Next, his Mo servant got out of the carriage, whereupon Mo declared that those who offended the Lord would be killed without a drop of pity. This, of course, didn't please the head of the brigands, so he ordered his boys to kill him and all their accomplices. Mo didn't stand for it, and in 1 second Mo had dealt with almost all of the brigands. The Lord further asked Mo to remember to keep at least one alive as a messenger. Su Hongxi was even a little surprised that he had hired an Earth Stage refiner. Su Hansa was very curious about what kind of person he was to have such servants. The Lord bent down to him and said that he was just a man after money. But of course, this was not true, and Su Hongxi guessed it but did not say anything about it. Su Hongxi decided to take advantage of this and hugged him. And afterwards he introduced himself and offered to be friends, since he really likes to be friends with the rich. The master laughed and said, "Then we'll definitely get along." After which, Mo continued to kill the brigands. He did it mercilessly and very quickly, and blood splattered everywhere. Even Qiazing Bei was surprised at how cruel this Mo was. Couldn't even imagine what kind of stage he is. He left some men for the Lord. The Lord, of course, thanked him for it. Su Hongxi was surprised at how brutal he was. He even asked to leave them to kill them himself. Then the master called Su Hansa over to take a look at him. He couldn't even tie a chicken with his weak hands, and his pretty face was nothing to speak of. So he was clearly not some kind of sadist. That said, he won't argue. Killing is a straightforward and fairly effective way to resolve any conflict, but far from the best. And those robbers immediately started begging for mercy and almost crying. So the gentleman took out a box of heartworms. If the person who eats them indulges in bad thoughts, he or she will immediately feel pain like a knife stabbed into the heart. If the victim cannot control himself, he will simply explode. He further ordered them to receive them, and he would let them go to all 4 sides. So their lives were in their own hands. They of course wanted to get away alive, so they started eating these heartworms. But there was another condition. They agreed to everything, so they asked what else the master wanted. He threw a book at them that listed the families that had suffered at the hands of their gang. He doesn't care if they pay those or persuade them in some other way, but if at least 70% of the families on this list put in a good word about them at the local branches of Shangguan Trading Company, the worms will be extracted from them. They agreed to all the conditions and promised not to say anything to anyone about what had happened. The master stopped them and told them to tell everyone the truth, and also to tell them that all their troubles came from crossing the Shangguan Trading Company. And now they could, after all that, go do good deeds. Su Hanzi said that he had done a very clever thing, namely that now they would not be able to continue the robbery and his good name would be on everyone's lips. The Lord only laughed and added that the news does not spread by itself. He further said that they were leaving immediately, as this road had already worn him out. After that, Qiao Xingbei approached Su Hongxi and asked him if he knew he had an assistant from the beginning. Su Hongxi only smiled, because how could the future heir of the richest family in Jiangnan, Shangguan Wuwei, travel without a reliable assistant? At that time, Qiao Xingbei assumed that he knew him. Su Hongxi only confirmed her words and said that the Swordsman intelligence network was not just for looks, but also for business. Qiao Xingbei asked him again why he said it would be dangerous to travel with them since such an excellent assistant is at the Lord's side. Su Hongxi decided to confess and said that in fact the main threat here was not the bandits, and the gentleman himself, who hides behind the mask of a kindly man. Zia Zhenbei didn't understand, since it seemed to her that the Lord was quite kind, for right in front of her, he had just spared those brigands. Su Hongxi was surprised at how gullible she was. This gentleman was able to stay on top of Jiangnan's richest family, and in doing so, he had to, many times, go head-to-head. Xia Zhengbei suggested running away to avoid trouble, but Su Hanyi didn't understand why. He added, however, that at this point it is safe to say that the latter does not want to hurt them. His bodyguard is a perfecting Earth stage. If Wu Wei really wished to share with them, he wouldn't play around like this. But there was something more important, namely traveling with a walking money bag. After all, you could for being about any spending money on food, as well as the opportunity to earn good money for life. After which, Su Hongxi asked the Lord for them to stop by a restaurant not far from here, of course agreed and pay even. After some time, they reached the city of Jiuzhou. Due to the protection from the academy, the city is not developing like the other provinces. But still, it's not worse than the capital city itself. The master also turned to Su Hansa and said that he would be honored to dine with him in Wangxian today. Su Hangxi, of course, couldn't refuse such an offer. Suddenly, they were interrupted by Qiazing Bei, who said that it was better to go to the academy already. Su Hangxi said she was heartless. They've already been through so much with Mr. Shangguan on their way to Jiuzhou, and now their paths may be parted forever. So it was necessary to have one last drink to ease the bitterness of parting. Even the master himself didn't mind. Qiazin Bei realized that the man just wanted to force another free dinner out of him. Afterward, they went to a restaurant to get drunk. At the table, Su Hangxi realized that Brother Shangguan couldn't drink at all, even though they hadn't had so much to drink that he was lying on the table. After a while, he kept offering to drink over and over again, and the gentleman kept drinking and drinking alcohol to make friends. After drinking heavily already, the gentleman kept offering him more and more to eat, or else he looked like a cane. He didn't refuse and continued to eat his dinner. Qiazin Bei looked at all of this and was not in the mood. After a few more drinks, Su Hanyu was already offering her to drink some with him. Qiazin Bei kept refusing, but he kept pestering and pestering. She decided not to get involved anymore and go to bed while they were still there drinking and drinking. After a few hours, it was a very dark night, and it was very quiet. They were lying around the room completely drunk on the table and on the couch. But in reality, Su Hanyu was not actually sleeping, but was just biding his time. He got up quietly and went to the secret meeting. After the door slammed shut, Mo appeared. He asked the master if he should follow him. The master was also awake and said that it was not necessary. And he went on to say that the man had only gone out to meet with an informant who had been gathering information about recent incidents in Jiuzhou. It hadn't occurred to him that this kid was getting more and more interesting, but what surprised him even more was that he could drink so much. Su Hangxi actually went to the informant and asked what the results of his investigation were. The informant then gave him a report of recent demon activity and perfecting criminals in various regions, and he also added that the same Shangguan Wu Wei was also really traveling with them. He had recently gone on a business trip to explore businesses in different regions, but he was also sure that their meeting with him was a mere coincidence. Su Hangxi then asked what was even going on in the palace. The latter explained that there were people there negotiating with the Jiuzhou Academy. They are most likely trying to prevent Jiang Bei from returning under the Academy's protection. Su Hangxi never thought that Jiang Bei's return to the Academy would attract the attention of such a big fish. The next morning, they went to the Academy, and that's when he realized it wasn't going to be easy at all. Jiang Bei noticed that he was sighing heavily and asked why he was so serious. Su Hansa thinks that he might have difficulties this time, even before he could get in touch with his teacher. Before entering the academy, they met several officials who must have come for him. Jiang Bei immediately hid behind Su Hansa, for she realized that they wanted to capture her before she crossed the threshold of the academy. The immortal Qing Dynasty has no power over Jiuzhou Academy and its students. Therefore, they definitely can't detain her. So they decided they would just wait until she was expelled from it. Suddenly, someone called out to her. It was Master Jiang Bei. Jiang Bei, of course, immediately bowed before her master. The master ordered her to get up on the bird. She had known about her troubles for a long time, and she was very sad for her. And further, she called her to her, for she would help her examine her damaged immortality veins. Jiang Bei asked her to stop, for she had another guy with her. But as soon as she looked over there, she didn't see anyone. She didn't realize where he was. Su Hangxi hid behind a pillar. While doing so, he could feel the sword in the box vibrating. Su Hangxi realized that the sword was also happy to return here. After all, it seems his relationship with the previous owner was warmer than he told him. After that, the master along with Jiang Bei went to the elders. The master asked them to examine her disciple's immortality veins, and she would still need their help later. The elders began to whisper amongst themselves, namely considering Jiang Bei's position. Even if they did something, she would need years of hard work. Master interrupted them, saying that she would do anything to help her. Suddenly an old elder walked in, who started saying that since Jiang Bei's immortality veins had dried up, they only had to expel her from the academy. The master started shouting at the second elder, saying that Qiazin Bei had gone through a multi-level selection process, so they couldn't just take her out and exclude her. The second elder recalled that Jiang Bei covered up her father's corruption and made a scene at his execution. For such indecent behavior, there was no way she could be left behind, even if she was the best of the best. The academy is respected not because of its power. It is because of the fact that they punish evil and protect the good, without indulging in any vices. Jiang Bei admits that she barged in on the execution, but she won't let them slander her father. The second elder decided to remind her again that it had been proven that her father's neglect of his duties had caused tens of thousands of deaths. She started shouting that her father was being framed. But the master interrupted her, saying that even if Jiang Bei's father had committed a crime, he had already been punished. And even though she had stormed into the execution, she quickly came to her senses and didn't hurt anyone. And if he justified her exclusion with indecent behavior, she would not accept such a verdict. Then the second elder became curious about her immortality vein. The master explained that if not how many perfecting masters united, they would already be able to cure them in no time. The second elder only laughed, for in that case, Jiang Bei should be stripped of her student status and handed over to the representatives of the immortal Qing Dynasty waiting downstairs. That made Jiang Bei so nervous that even sweat ran down her forehead. Su Hongxi suddenly appeared and jumped into the conversation, saying that he didn't expect to see a bunch of commoners here. Jiang Bei immediately recognized him and was overjoyed. At this, the elders started shouting at him and ordered him to keep his mouth shut. Then Su Hanzi only laughed and asked where he was wrong. They only refused to help her because they are afraid of offending this elder, and then said that second elder was hiding something from all of them since he was pushing so hard to exclude Jiang Bei. The second elder did not tolerate it and ordered the elders to kill the insolent man. Su Hongxi only laughed at the second elder's confidence. After all, these perfecting masters clearly shouldn't attack him. The second elder realized that even though he was a swordsman, he had no right to barge into the academy. He asked him how he knew he was a swordsman, if he hadn't even introduced himself yet. And then he assumed that the yellow-stepped fiend had passed it on to him before he died. In response, the second elder wanted to kill him because he was very angry with the animal. Then he turned to the elders and asked why they were frozen there and did not follow his orders. Those declared that they could not attack the swordsman, for such was the law. At that time, the second elder turned around to Su Hansa and declared that swordsmen could not interfere in the affairs of their academy. Su Hongxi didn't want to waste time on their trivia, so he turned around and walked away. And next, Su Hongxi turned to Jiazeng Bei calling her 600 silver. He also said that apparently they were not going to help from recovering the immortality vein. Therefore, he suggested her to become a swordswoman at that time. After which, he showed the ball box and said that this Duanwu had already recognized her as his mistress. If she agreed, she would be able to use it. Jiazeng Bei thought he was joking, for if this one was true, it would completely change her entire life. Then the second elder was contacted by the customer and ordered him to stop Jiang Bei from getting Duanwu. After all, if she became a swordswoman, they wouldn't be able to get her. The second elder wasn't thrilled, for if he attacked them out of the blue on the academy grounds, he would definitely be punished. The customer only ordered by shouting not to waste time, for he certainly had no choice. All the elders immediately ran up to the second elder, for he abruptly grabbed his head and it was evident how ill he felt. The second elder had already jumped on Su Hansa and Jiazeng Bei with renewed vigor to kill them, as suddenly the sword from the box began to vibrate, and then his awl popped out to protect it. It flew straight into the second elder, but the latter managed to reflect that sword. He didn't understand how such a pitiful Duanwu without a master dared to attack him. And then Su Hongxi appeared in front of his face. But the second elder was not a bad guy and managed to dodge his sword in time. Su Hongxi didn't lose heart and started attacking him with a bunch of sword swings, but he was still unable to hurt the second elder. And next, the second elder activated some sort of technique, and the room around him just disappeared. Afterwards, the second elder admitted that he had underestimated him. Su Hanisi decided to counterattack him unexpectedly, but the man still dodged. And after another attack from Su Hansa, he still managed to corner the second elder. He jumped up and thus fell into Su Hansa's hurricane. And further, he activated the technique Horse Typhoon Scream. He was starting to squeeze right in front of his eyes. And afterwards, Jiazeng Bei and the master saw a huge explosion. Jiazeng Bei couldn't believe that swordsmen were actually capable of such an ability. But surprisingly, the second elder withstood it all, after which he stopped being afraid of these swordsmen. The second elder also admitted that more than one perfecting dark stage was not his equal, but unfortunately for him, he's already one step away from the earthly stage. Su Hansa successfully fended off all of his punches. Still, he couldn't dodge one. The second elder hit him in the back with all his strength, and he flew into the rock, making a huge dent with his body. The second elder began to laugh at him for losing the will to fight, when he realized the chasm separating their powers. But Su Hongxi was also not a bad guy, and he was also smiling, for he just felt sorry for his suit. It had cost him a lot of money. It was very annoying for him to tear it up, and so he became very angry and his power began to gush out, causing the second elder to begin to be blown off the ground by his power. And then they both took off so that they could finally fight normally. Su Hansa was curious to fight with him, because he had said that he was one step away from the Earth stage, so he was eager to test him. Qiao Zhangbei watched all this, and was shocked that the two of them were both walking in the sky. It seemed that Su Hangxi had almost reached the Earth stage as well. Master interrupted her, saying that he was using some secret technique to bring himself to the earthly stage of perfection. Meanwhile, Su Hansa decided to show him the true strength of a swordsman. The second elder watched and didn't understand how this was even possible. And next, Su Hanisi decided to attack him with a strong technique that he wouldn't stop. As suddenly some old man appeared, who still stopped his attack with one finger. Su Hansu was just betting that he would show up after all, namely the head of the academy himself. The head of the academy immediately noticed that he had mastered the heavenly execution quite well. Su Hangxi just couldn't understand whether he was praising him right now, or his own sword technique. The head of the academy explained that since he had internalized this teaching, he considered him a worthwhile person. The second elder no longer thought that this reclusive Satu Chakun would suddenly show up here, making even the customer a little nervous. He realized it was time to leave before it was too late, and started to get out of there. Suddenly, 3 elders appeared in front of him, and wanted to detain him. The second elder saw no second plan to deal with himself and self-destruct, since there was no escape. After a few seconds, his body began to swell and become covered in balloons, and then it exploded into small pieces, thereby preserving very important and secret information. He deliberately blew himself up, fearing punishment for his deeds. He was a true madman, and after that, they saw the controlling foulness. And one of the elders immediately carried this foul thing straight to the head of the academy. He didn't understand how that one had dared to sneak into the academy, so he ordered the elders to investigate him and report back to him everything they learned about this foul thing. Next, the head felt something strange, and decided to check it out. Thus he teleported. This feeling led him straight to the lord who was resting on the roof of the lodge. The head recognized that he was quite brave since he had decided to spy on Jixia Academy. The head then suggested that the controlling uncleanness was his doing. The lord decided to upset him a little and began to deny it. After which, a few kilometers away, Su Hannes along with the others saw a huge, fiery explosion. He wondered who this old man was fighting with, for his attacks were terrifying and astonishing. Judging from the explosions, the master determined that his opponent wasn't lagging behind either. He must also be a celestial stage refiner. Su Hansu was surprised, as the celestial stage should be rare, and this was the second representative he had seen today. Meanwhile, the gentleman noticed that the old geezer hadn't changed at all. Starkey decided to teach him a lesson and summoned a huge arrow from the sky. The gentleman realized that he was serious and not childish. The lord called out his familiar in response to his arrow, and asked if the latter was afraid that they might accidentally blow the entire Jixia away. Starkey stopped and began to look into his eyes, and the gentleman accordingly began to look into the old man's eyes. In fact, the head of the academy knew that the latter would not stoop to such a level. Next, they began to dispel their techniques, the old man descending to the ground altogether. The master immediately asked him why he had attacked him. The old man only laughed, saying that he hadn't seen him in a long time, and he was just itching to fight him. The master heard him and handed him an itch to scratch his hands himself. It turns out that the lord of tens of thousands of monsters came as far as Jixia just to give the old man this stick. The gentleman began to tell me that he had been traveling and out of boredom decided to stop by for some entertainment. His demeanor annoyed the old man, but the gentleman promised to try to control himself next time, and then the old man said goodbye to him. But at last the gentleman decided to remind him not to tell anyone about it, for he was now a regular rich guy. Starkey told him not to worry. As long as he acted like a normal person, he wouldn't kill him. At the same time, on the way to the academy, he realized that it looked like the king of the undead was going to cause some kind of disaster again this time.